we are facing Islamic State, so-called Islamic State. This picture of terrorism in the world, where does it sit? Where lands its root?
Well, for one thing, we should always be cautious about the use of political terminology, because almost every term in political discourse, democracy, freedom, market, whatever you like, has two meanings. It has its literal meaning, and it has the meaning that's used in political warfare. And terrorism is a good example. The word terrorism has a meaning. It's defined in international law and the U.S. Code and so on. But that's not the definition we're allowed to use. We use the word terrorism in a way which means their terrorism against us, but not our terrorism against them. That's not terrorism. So, for example, if we were to use the word terrorism in its literal meaning, the most extreme terrorist operation in the world today would be Obama's global assassination campaign, the drone campaign. I mean, if, say, Iran were carrying out a campaign to assassinate people throughout the world who it suspects are planning to harm them. So, for example, to assassinate the editors of the New York Times and the Washington Post who publish articles calling for the bombing of Iran, say, or to assassinate Israeli leaders who are murdering Iranian scientists and calling for the bombing of Iran and so on. If they were to do that, we'd call it a massive terrorist campaign. We're doing it, but we don't call it a terrorist campaign. That's, if you take a look at the formal, public, not secret, character of the drone campaign, it's aimed at killing people who are suspected of intending to harm the United States. As I say, if any other country were doing that, we'd probably have a nuclear war because it would be such massive terrorism. Furthermore, this is a terrorist generating campaign. It generates terrorists. When you suddenly attack a Yemeni village and kill somebody, maybe the person you're aiming at, maybe not, who maybe who's a suspect, and maybe you kill some other people, that elicits a desire for revenge. So it increases the number of what we call terrorists. In fact, if you look at the whole war on terror, which so-called, which started 15 years ago, at that time, what we call terror, this kind of retail terror, was pretty much limited to a corner of tribal areas in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now it's worldwide. West Africa, South Asia, Levant, everywhere. Because that's the effect of carrying out massive terror. Now let's take the Islamic State. If you take a look at the analyses by U.S. specialists, the former CIA analysts of the Middle East, people like Graham Fuller, Paul Pillar, others, they point out the obvious. They say ISIS, the Islamic State, is an outgrowth of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. The U.S. invasion of Iraq is certainly the worst crime of this millennium. It killed hundreds of thousands of people, all kinds of torture and terror, destruction, maybe 4 million people displaced, 2 million of them refugees. It incited sectarian conflict, which did not exist before. It turned into a major sectarian war, which is tearing the country apart and the region apart. This interacted. That's part of the core of ISIS. There's another one. The most extreme radical fundamentalist state in the world is the major U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia. Its version of Islam is the Wahhabi Salafi version is already way out on the extreme, and it's also a missionary state, so it exports Wahhabi doctrine both with funding and by establishing madrasas, Quranic schools, mosques, clerics, and so on. And it's spread over a good part of the world. ISIS is an extremist fringe of the extremist version of Islam promulgated by the leading U.S. ally in the region, Saudi Arabia, which is now also bombing Yemen and destroying what's left of that country. Well, this whole amalgam has put together a real monstrosity. There's no doubt that the Islamic State is a pretty horrible development, but it has roots. This is not the whole story. You know, a lot of it comes out of the collapse of traditional Arab and much Muslim society, which is a long story in itself, also with imperialist elements involved. But out of that comes monstrosities like ISIS. It didn't come out of nowhere.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.